Welcome to Oak City Church, a family of learners, lovers, and givers sent. For more information, visit us online at oakcitychurch.com. Let us know if we can help you in any way. Thank you for listening.
We're reading from Mark chapter 15, 1 through 15. Stand for the word. And as soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. And they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." And the chief priests accused him of many things. And Pilate again asked him, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed.
Now at the feast he used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again said to them, "Then what shall I do with the man you call the king of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Crucify him." And Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified.
This is the word of the Lord.
We're moving through, we're almost to the end of the Gospel of Mark, and this week was a week. Pontius Pilate, that's a week. So over the years, and someone said this again just recently, made me think about it, that people have described my preaching style as conversational, and I kind of know what that means. I mean, I ask a few questions now and again, but it doesn't feel like a conversation to me. I'm going to be honest, it feels like a speech, a sermon, a spiel. But I think what that means is, and I do try not to be like, in a negative way, preachy or like dogmatic or condescending in the way that I talk. And I think I do try and keep things light until they're heavy. Like, I think there was a Jimmy V thing where he's like, laugh a little, cry a little, and think a little, something like that. And I do think there's a way of making it a little bit of a roller coaster. I like making you laugh, probably to a fault, If I can get a laugh, especially in the middle of the sermon, it makes me think that you're paying attention. Because otherwise, I really have no idea what's going on out there, And if you laugh, it makes me think that you like me. Even if you don't, it makes me think that you do, and so it makes me feel better. That might be, again, to a fault. John Piper, purposefully never made anybody laugh, and he's not funny, so it makes sense. All that, though, this week, Pontius Pilate, just this sermon has been depressing. And I'm not sure if it's the end of, a ministry season tends to run with the school year, so we're kind of at the end in the summer. It's a little bit things drag a little bit. If it's the end of a long sermon series, and it's been a long sermon series, and I don't mind that. I mean, a lot of you have said you really enjoy going through the book slowly, went through Romans slowly, and I enjoy going through them slowly, in part so that scenes like this, the net of it is a scene like Pilate depresses your pastor because he spent a few weeks in this scene of Pilate, and it's meant to be that. And so sitting in it does something for you when you sit in it. I've never meditated on this story. I'm going to sync up the stories because all four Gospels have Pilate. I've never spent this much time in it. And it made me think of the saying, it's always darkest before the dawn. And we're getting really, really dark. I mean, the dawn is coming. We know how it goes. Jesus is going to rise from the dead. But these scenes right before, and going through them week by week, they get darker and darker and darker and more pointless and more. And this scene is kind of a hopeless scene. And it makes sense because the world is a broken, fallen, hopeless place without the work of Christ. without the work of Christ in our lives, our hearts devolve in the way that we're going to see Pilate devolve into some type of slow-burning tragedy. And that's what this passage is going to feel like. And all these passages, the betrayal of Jesus, the disciples fleeing Jesus, Peter denying Jesus, the religious leaders rejecting Jesus, and this scene, they're all like tragedy, you know. Now, to be fair, we have stories that are tragedies. Like, we have some really popular stories that are tragedies. Like, what are some of your favorite tragedies? See what I did there? Your favorite tragedies? Yes, Hamlet. I don't know what happens there, but I read that. That was one that came up as tragedy. What are some others? There's one like famous tragedy, one of the highest grossing films of all time. Titanic. Yes, Titanic. I saw that one time. Had no need to see it again. I think it was my wife and I think she's driving right now. She might be listening. This will be a test. It was our first date. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that doesn't come back up at the end, right? Like there's no happy ending to Titanic, right? The boat sinks. This is the only thing I remember about the end of Titanic, is the meme. I don't even know why she says that. I thought about The Green Mile. You remember that movie? That guy dies, though, right? I love the movie, but I'm like, why did I love that movie? The guy dies. Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, Titanic is a real thing, but things like Schindler's List, if you've ever seen that, like one of the most powerful movies I've ever seen, or if you've ever read Elie Wiesel, I think is how you say his name, wrote a book called Night, where like that will move you, but it does not come back up at the end. It's just tragic. And y'all, that's just where this goes. This will not be fun for any of us. So, here we go. Mark 15. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and the scribes and the whole council, and they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. So, last week we were in a scene where he's before the religious leaders, and they're trying him in like a religious court, and so the accusation is blasphemy, that he called himself God. Now they're moving to the Roman civil court, and so they have to change the accusation because the Romans don't care about blasphemy, but they do care about treason. And so for the Romans, all these people groups that they had conquered, and they don't care about their gods. All of them have different gods. But if you call yourself king, like if you come for Caesar, you best not miss. And so you can't call yourself king. And the Jewish people knew that. And so Pilate asks him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And so that's the accusation that they bring to Pilate. This guy said he's the king of the Jews. And Jesus answers him and says, "You have said so." And the chief priests accuse him of many things. They would go to Pilate first thing in the morning because he would hold court, his tribunal or whatever, first thing in the morning. He would get it out of the way, dawn, that someone they would do it, and then he would get on with his day after a couple hours. So you want to get there early. So they get there early. He knows these religious leaders. This is what he deals with all the time. He's come into Jerusalem from Caesarea, which is on the coast, on the Mediterranean Sea. And he's come in for the Passover festival because things get crazy during the Passover festival because there's hundreds of thousands of people there. And so he's used to them just bringing stuff that he thinks is dumb. And so they brought something that's dumb. Now, when he asks the question, "Are you the king of the Jews?" and Jesus says, "You have said so," like, that's not a helpful answer, honestly. So he's got to be like, oh gosh, what's my day going to be like now between those guys and this guy? I'm going to put these together. So John 18 recounts this and says, "Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas, the high priest, to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover." So these Jewish leaders could not go into a Gentile house, a non-Jewish house, without being unclean, and then they couldn't do the Passover. So Pilate goes outside to them and says, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" And they said, "If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Like, what? He did something. Trust us. And Pilate said, "Take him yourself and judge him by your own law." And the Jews said to him, "It's not lawful for us to put anyone to death." And so he says, "This isn't my problem, it's your problem." And they respond, "But we want to kill him." and we can't kill him unless you let us kill him. Can we kill him? And so we go back to Mark, and Pilate asks again, have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you. But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. And that, I think, is a really interesting line. And we get windows into what's going on inside of Pilate, and I'm going to make a list of these as I go through this sermon. And this is the first one, that Pilate is amazed. There's a way to be silent. You can be silent in different ways. You can be silent in a way that you're terrified, or you're just frozen in the moment and silent. You can be silent in a way that's kind of arrogant and I don't have to answer you, like condescending type of silent. Or you can be silent in a calm and non-anxious way, particularly given the fact that there are people outside that want to kill you and might get what they want. And he is silent in that way. And Pilate is a little bit blown away by it. And Pilate is a leader, and Pilate knows people. He deals with people all the time, and he recognizes strength in the silence of Jesus. Just talk about Pilate for a minute. Pilate was a real guy. We have real historical writings about Pilate. There was a time when I guess you would call them liberal Bible theologians or critics were saying, well, he wasn't a real guy. And then in, I think, 1960s, they found a plaque in the Caesarea by the sea, which is where his palace normally was, right on the Mediterranean, that had an inscription about Pontius Pilate during this time. And so he's a real guy. He's in all four Gospels. This guy existed. This happened. And it's just something to note about your Bible. I was reading Acts a couple weeks ago, and it was about Paul meeting Priscilla and Aquila, and because they got kicked out of Rome, because the emperor kicked the Jews out of Rome. And I was like, I wonder if that really happened. And so sure enough, Claudius was the emperor in 49 AD, and he kicked all the Jews out of Rome because they were having a dispute about somebody named Chrestus. And so 15 years after Jesus, Rome was already up in the air enough that the emperor had to kick the Jews out. This stuff is real stuff. It really happened. There's another guy in that passage in Acts where it was talking about a proconsul in Corinth named Gallio. And I wonder if that's a real guy. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Seneca. He's a Roman philosopher of some renown. Like, that's a name that you hear thrown around a bit. But Gallio was Seneca's brother. Like, these are real people. And Pilate's he's a real person. And this really happened. It's in all four gospel accounts. And it's pretty risky to put it in there if you're not positive that he's really involved. And he's a politician, and he just wants to get out of this. He's not like a crazy high-level politician, but he's not nothing. He's a governor, and there were 30 or 40 Roman provinces that had governors at the time. And so it's almost like the 50 states, but they had their provinces were separated into like 3 tiers of importance, and Judea was the lowest level of importance. And so this was an ambitious guy. He probably wanted to be the governor someplace else. So if he manages this well, then maybe he'll get promoted. And so he's just trying to keep the peace and not let things get crazy, especially during the Passover. Pilate is not a good guy. There are 2 Jewish philosophers from that time, Philo and Josephus, that describe him as inflexible, stubborn, and cruel. Accuse him of corruption, insults, robberies, and unjust executions, and detail some incidences that he had with the people of Jerusalem. And so not a good guy, a political guy, and he probably just wants to get this over with and move on with his day, but it's about to get complicated. So I'm going to flip to Luke. They began to accuse Jesus, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar," which he didn't do. He said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's," and saying that he himself is Christ, a king, which he did do, but there's been an interpretation thing with what that means when it comes to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered, "You have said so." And Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." This like a he said, but one guy isn't saying anything, or there's 3 sides to every story, which in this case is like your side, and I don't care if you're Pilate. But he finds Jesus more believable than he does the religious leaders. Like, you've accused him of this stuff, but I don't think he's guilty of it. But they were urgent, saying, he stirs up the people, teaching throughout Judea, all Judea, from Galilee even to this place. So they keep pressing it. Like, no, we're serious. We really want to kill him. We mean it, And it should be done here, but Pilate lets it keep going. Luke writes that Pilate then sends Jesus to Herod. Now, there's religious leaders, and then there's Pilate, and Herod is somewhere in the middle. He is a kind of a Jewish puppet king appointed by Rome. And so Pilate sends Jesus to Herod and says, this is your problem, you deal with it. And he doesn't say anything to Herod either, so Herod sends him back. And Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people and said, you brought me this man as one who's misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I didn't find this man guilty of any of your charges against him, neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. And he says, look, y'all, this guy didn't do anything. Like, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish him and release him. I don't know. Maybe you should just release him if he hasn't done anything wrong, but I will punish him and release him. So, when we start this list, we see that Pilate is amazed by Jesus and that Pilate doesn't believe that Jesus is guilty. Like, we've got that data. We'll flip to John. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said, do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me? And Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done? And Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from this world. And Pilate says, so you are a king. And Jesus says, you say that I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I've come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And Pilate says, what is truth? That, again, is a fascinating statement on Pilate's part. What is truth? And it comes across as cynical. And after he had said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, I find no guilt in him. What is truth seems to be a very relevant question for the story. And what is truth seems to be a relevant question for our time, but probably for all time. Can we know truth? How do we know truth? Does truth matter? What guides our decisions? If it's not truth, what is it? Are we guided by principles or pragmatism, truth or results? And so I'll add this to the list. He's amazed at Jesus. He doesn't believe Jesus to be guilty, and he's more pragmatic than he is principled. And I think that's clear throughout the story. And I think that's a problem. And it kind of dictates how this story goes. The passage starts to feel like a tug of war. Pilate senses there's something there and wants to let him go. Like, there's something about this Jesus that's making him uneasy and wants to let him go, but then he's got this other side. Now at the feast, he used to release for them one prisoner of whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews? And then it says, for he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. Like, he sees clearly what's going on here. Amazed at Jesus, doesn't believe he's guilty, more pragmatic than principled, and knows that he's been falsely accused. So you can know someone's not guilty, but you can think that the accusation was like innocent or sincere. He knows that the accusation wasn't sincere, that these guys are just trying to trap Jesus. But the chief priest stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again said to them, what shall I do with the man you call the king of the Jews? And they cried out, crucify him. And Pilate said to them, why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, crucify him. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. So amazed by Jesus, doesn't believe he's guilty. He's more pragmatic than principled, knows he's been falsely accused, and really wants to appease the crowd, which is more pragmatic than principled. But like, this is what he wants, is to make this whole thing go away. just to appease the crowd. Does the whole thing just feel icky? Because it does to me. Let me add something to that. And I didn't realize this. I probably should have before this week, but the scourging and the crucifixion are two separate punishments. You could scourge someone, but not crucify them. And we have heard about that before, but it is the thing where they've got a leather whip and they tie pieces of glass or pieces of bone in it, and then they'd whip somebody with it, and the thing would like wrap around their back to their front. It would shred their back for sure. There are accounts of like bone being exposed. There are accounts of people's bowels spilling out because it just rips their skin apart on the front. There's accounts of people dying when they've gone through this. And again, it's a separate thing. So Pilate, and these passages make this clear, he did this to Jesus, a man he believed to be innocent, in the hopes that could make the whole thing go away, to appease the crowd, that would be enough. It tortures the guy. And so I'm going to add to this list at the bottom of it. You just go to the next page. He could be absolutely heartless. Absolutely heartless. I'm going to add this to it. Matthew 27, besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I've suffered much because of him today in a dream. So he's got another piece of information where his wife's like, get him away, because there's something, he's a righteous man, and like, don't be a part of this. And a few verses later in Matthew, when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather a riot was beginning, like he was losing control of this thing, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves. And the people answered, his blood be on us and our children. And he released from them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. So he takes some type of a half measure, I'm going to wash my hands of it, which was no measure, in order to somehow get out of it. So amazed at Jesus, doesn't believe he's guilty, more pragmatic than principled, knows he's been falsely accused, wants to appease the crowd, could be heartless. And the last one, he refuses to do the thing that he knows is the right thing to do. And there's something even more weaselly about pretending that he got out of it by washing his hands of it, when he just can't escape his role in it. And so Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Sometimes the boat sinks, like some scenes are just horrible scenes from beginning to end, and this is one of them. The whole thing makes me a little bit sick, and I think that's what it's supposed to do, is make us a little bit sick. And so I'm going to say 3 or 4 things about this. And one of them is sometimes we're on the short end of the brokenness of the world. We live in a broken, fallen world. We are broken, fallen people. We live amongst broken, fallen people. And so we're going to experience that. We're not going to escape it. And sometimes it's going to be worse than other times. And I do think there's something in this scene where Jesus is quiet, a little bit obscure. Like the last scene, he's not like pushing back so hard to try, not defending himself, not trying to fix it. Like he knows this is it, and he knows what has to happen to fix it, and he's just going to do it. But he goes through all of it. And so some days, some weeks, some months, some seasons in your life are just they're going to stink because we live in a broken, fallen world, and God knows what that's like. And I think we take for granted that God knows what that's like, but I think in the history of world religions, it's a phenomenal statement to say that God knows what that's like, that God allowed himself to experience what that's like. I just don't think there are many conceptions of God in the history of humanity where they're that bold to say God knows what it's like to experience a broken, fallen world to experience the sinfulness of the world the way that we experience it. But we go through these scenes, and the crucifixion, but even this scourging, he knows what it's like to experience that. That's one thing. Here's another. I think part of my problem with Pilate is I can be more like Pilate than I want to admit. I think Pilate is such a complicated figure. I am amazed by Jesus. I think Jesus was being falsely accused because I believe Jesus was the Messiah. I'm not sure Pilate didn't believe that Jesus was who he said he was. He was kind of put on the spot. I don't know what he knew about Jesus before all this happened. That's a lot to deal with, like in the heat of that moment. There are some versions of Pilate's story as you move forward that include him coming to faith later in his life. His political career never got off the ground, but there are some accounts where he comes to faith later in his life. And so I think I'm just a tiny bit sympathetic. I think all of us see Jesus like falsely accused by the world around us, at times maligned, slandered, misrepresented, and we're not sure the best way to respond to it, how to defend him, how to represent him accurately, what to do about it. My faith can waver. I can want to appease the crowd. I can like the crowd and want the crowd to like me and negotiate in those moments of what does it mean to be more principled than pragmatic, because I can definitely be more pragmatic than principled with my trust in Christ and therefore my obedience. In fact, I'd probably argue that all of us are more pragmatic than we are principled, that obedience often is a cost-benefit equation, that obedience is easy when your principles line up with your pragmatism, but it's hard when your principles tell you to do something that you know is not pragmatic at all, and you can't see how it's going to work out. Those times are hard for every one of us. I don't know that I can say I can be heartless like Pilate, but I'm pretty sure I can in the depths of my heart. And I can refuse to do the thing that I know is right. And that is, we are in process of being conformed to the image of Christ. We're being made more like him, but our fundamental problem is that we worship ourselves instead of worshiping him, and that's the change that's happening in our lives. So we trust our own judgment, we seek our own good, we follow our own plan, we have a hard time surrendering to him, and when we do surrender to him, we do it imperfectly. And so there's something about Pilate that I recognize in myself. This is a great quote. I know I've used it before, but it's from a guy named Brennan Manning. He says, "When I get honest, I admit that I'm a bundle of paradoxes. I believe and I doubt. I hope and I get discouraged. I love and I hate. I feel bad about feeling good. I feel guilty about not feeling guilty. I'm trusting and I'm suspicious. I'm honest and I still play games. Aristotle said I'm a rational animal. I say I'm an angel with an incredible capacity for beer." Just pointing out, the book, I think, was The Ragamuffin Gospel, about not pretending to be something more than what we are, about being honest with ourselves. And so I think there is something of the passage that is a bit of a mirror that forces us to acknowledge some things. And I'll say this: Jesus allows himself to go through all of this so we can be forgiven of it, whatever we see in that mirror, and rescued from it. And so he's letting himself, he's being quiet, he's not making his defense, he's going through it so that we don't need to stay there, so that there's no condemnation for us who are in Christ Jesus, so that the power of the Holy Spirit can be at work in us to conform us to the image of Christ, so that we can have hope that our hearts and the world around us doesn't have to stay like this, but can be transformed and go past it. Pilate asked the question, "What is truth?" and didn't realize he was staring at the truth. Like Jesus said, "I am the way, and I am the life, and I am the truth. And no one comes to the Father except through me." And so when we want to know what truth is, we look at Jesus. And this is a testimony to us about what Jesus is like, but the truth is Jesus. Like, that's who we look at. And And he went through it so that we could know the truth, so that we could know him, so that we could conform our lives to him, so that we could live the lives that he had created us to be through the power that eventually is going to raise the boat, like resurrect his dead body, But in these moments, we don't have that. And so I'm going to finish with, what my mind went to was Hebrews 11. And so Hebrews 11 is a kind of a famous chapter in the Bible. People call it the Hall of Faith, where whoever it is that wrote Hebrews talks about all these people that lived different. They lived principled instead of pragmatic. They were able to, by faith, live out their lives. And so faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. By faith, Abel offered God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was receiving inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in a land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with them of the same promise. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, who had received the promise, that was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because he saw that the child was beautiful and they weren't afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of the Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. By faith, the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they were tempted to do the same, were drowned. What more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. And it turns a little bit. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains, and dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. I got one more part to read. This is the best part. But there is something in that to say, this is not home. What Pilate is acting out on is the way that the world works. And we're in the midst of it. And living by faith, there is something about that, like for some of them went really well, and for others it went really bad. There's no guarantees with it. Sometimes it's going to go really well. Other times it's going to be really hard. God's in the midst of all of it, and it worked through all of it. And then he says, therefore, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Which I think is like where we're at in this passage today. And he says, consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. Father, these are hard passages, and I'm glad that you've put them in there and that you don't spare us from them, that you don't sugarcoat them. I don't know that we're going to find immediate purpose in them, Lord. but all of us are going through hard things. And it helps to make sense going through hard things, that there's an explanation for that. And more than there just being an explanation for that, you've gone through hard things. You know what it's like to go through hard things. And you've gone through the hardest thing, facing the consequences of sin and death, so that victory would be accomplished, Lord. Help us to set our eyes on you and to be encouraged on what you've done, and that you're with us, that you care for us, and that you will bring us through. I pray this in Jesus' name.